A very good article in Yahoo News by Harold Moss caught my attention, and there's so much to comment about. I just want to talk about literally the first paragraph regarding the SAT's place in college admissions. And by saying SAT, I include ACT as well. ACT is an equally valid, equally accepted test across the board for colleges. The SAT and the ACT have lost their cachet with some schools. Among the most competitive universities, they still hold cachet. Yet students are driven kind of by the desire to get away with something and not have to do something that other kids do, and some because they're just plain misled. The result, test optional, is for some students this excuse to not take a test when they then are hurting themselves. It needs to be distinguished from test blind admissions. Test blind means the university literally is not looking, or if it happens to see SAT or ACT scores, it truly is not evaluating them. There are a few colleges like that, not many who are considered most competitive, and if they are now, a test blind policy is almost certain to make them less competitive, less highly ranked 5 or 10 years from now. It means that unless you're considering a university for financial reasons, don't consider universities that are test blind. They are not going to hold up in the rankings very long. Test optional means you're not knocked out if you choose not to give SAT or ACT scores. You can still be considered, but you're losing a credential. You have one less thing to impress the admissions committees with. So your grades and your extracurriculars and the recommendations that you submit better be really good, because other kids who are applying with good SAT scores have that extra credential. It's not hard, so long as you work, to get an above average SAT or ACT score. My firm does this routinely for students. So it is at a student's peril. And for parents who are looking at scholarships that often come from a good SAT or ACT score, they're bereft. They're unlikely to get a big reward, a reward that many of our students get. Our average is $113,000 over 4 years, thanks to good grades and even more so high SAT or ACT scores. The reason why colleges have gone with an optional policy that they don't like to announce as, well, you probably should take it anyway, but it's optional, is that it started with their desire for more diverse applicants. Minority students weren't commanding in the last few decades as high scores, and many, because of it, didn't even want to apply to competitive colleges, fearing, oh, I'm just going to get rejected. That wasn't necessarily true. Colleges routinely overlooked low scores if it was from a minority student who was performing really well in school. So they chose to say, it's optional. We can still let you in. COVID comes along, and in 2020, many minority and non-minority students couldn't test. Test centers, remember, were closed as schools closed. So colleges felt compelled to accommodate them as well. If they didn't have scores to submit, they weren't going to knock them out of the pool. So now schools still are back to offering tests, and colleges have kept this test optional that you're not knocked out, but they have returned to a policy whereby they really are evaluating. And students with better scores are evaluated more highly. So the only type of kid, if he or she wants to be at a competitive university, who can get away with not submitting scores is someone with extraordinary extracurriculars and a 4.0 or really close. And still, at the most competitive colleges, that kid is competing against other kids with extraordinary extracurriculars and a 4.0 and high scores that they did submit. So please take this in and recognize test optional is a nice sounding phrase that should not let you out of an obligation to your parents and I think to yourself to strive for what you're most capable of and help yourself to higher scholarship awards and better acceptances.